It's Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman.
Good morning, welcome to Sunday Mornings on Radio Live. I'm Wallace Chapman, it's really lovely to be with you. You can text live to 3920, your issues, your feedback on the issues of the week with us now. To talk about those issues, we have Selwyn Manning in studio. Good morning, Selwyn.
Yeah, good morning, Wallace.
How are you?
Very good.
And Rodney Hide, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Selwyn. Good morning, Wallace.
Good morning. Coming in loud and clear. Now, speaking of the cyclone first up, a weather hit. Rodney, how are you? Safe and warm?
Oh, Wellington's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's very warm this morning. In fact, I came to the studio in my T-shirt.
Oh, there you go. It's not, Selwyn, not quite. You got a feel for the islands, who get these direct storms very hard, don't they?
Yeah, they get it when it's really hot and still pulling in the energy, isn't it? You know, at least when it comes down here, unless it's something like Cyclone Bowler, it starts to cool down a little bit by the time it gets here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start. What do we start with? Gosh, let's start with Judith Collins. An endorsement or a promotion? This is Aurovita, the milk company. What did you think of the events unfolding in the week? And of Judith Collins, what will happen to Judith? Should she resign? Will she resign? Rodney Hide.
I thought it was fabulous because, it was sort of one of these great political intrigue and unwinding stories. Of course, she should have been sacked. The reason she wasn't sacked is because she's the senior woman, bad look. John Key would be calculating, what sort of damage can she do if she's put on the backbench in election year. Probably best to sort of keep her there. But he said one more thing, she's gone. Here's why she should have been sacked. The endorsement to me wasn't the problem. It was the dinner. She's a minister in China. China takes, senior politicians or any politicians very, very seriously.
Right.
And business and politics is, of course, intertwined in China, not like here. So, then you had a minister on official business with a director and with a Chinese government official in border control. Very, very bad look. She didn't declare it. That alone was good enough for her to be stood down. The cardinal sin, though, was to mislead the Prime Minister and to have him put his credibility on the line defending her when she hadn't told him all the facts. She actually allowed him to go over the top, if you like, unarmed.
Do you agree with what Rodney Hide says, Selwyn?
Yeah, if Judith Collins was Pansy Wong, she would have been sacked by now. And it
wasn't as serious as what the Pansy Wong affair, though, was it?
Well, let's do a bit of a comparison there. I think the National Party was very keen to do a comparison between what was happening or unfolding with Judith Collins and Richard Worth. Well, totally different type of things in many respects. Pansy Wong's was closer in the sense that the engagement with her husband Sammy's businesses over in China were kind of intertwined with her ministerial visit, things like that. So there was a perception of a perception of a conflict of interest running there with Pansy Wong, and in the same way there's the conflict of interest that is demonstrating here, in my view, with what has gone on between Judith Collins and those there. But Rodney is right on these points here, absolutely right, that the first thing on whether or not there was an endorsement or was it a promotion and things, this is in some ways that's subjective and down to the evaluation of the person who's having a look at this, rubbing their chin and carrying on. The average punter here in New Zealand, if they peeled away their biases or their preferences and things, they probably think, that was giving a bit of a push for the husband's business there for sure. Now, if you look at this other meeting that took place, particularly with the unnamed official there are sensitivities all over the place. There's the pressure from the Chinese who do not and will not have one of their officials named by another. It becomes a diplomatic incident if they do. Collins has exposed New Zealand to that risk. There's also the thing where relationships, like Rodney was leading toward, relationships in China are really big. Even here, there's the old adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, in China, that's big. If you've got a person there who is a cabinet minister who has ties to a particular business, that's gold for that business. And particularly when they can pull it.
It's also worth noting, isn't it, Selwyn, that, her husband, I don't believe, is on that board for his business acumen. He's a paid director because of, I would guess, political connections, and that makes it doubly sensitive for her to handle.
Fill in the missing blanks. I mean, as the head of EasyO there, who deals in China, he said this sort of relationship building is what the Chinese do. We've got to get our heads around this. This is another way of doing business. And the fact of the matter is that if you do get an MP along to a dinner or to a launch, it means something. So
you're making the point. You're making the point. And the point is, yes, it does mean something. Yes, we've got to get our head around it, but you don't do it for your husband's business.
Yeah, and that's the big point. That's the thing that you underscore there. If you're a cabinet minister, and certainly one that has aspirations to be the prime minister of this country, you don't destroy your chances by snuggling in really close and really through your relationships. There is a cause-effect and outcome thing here where it opens the gate for the products.
Orevita's a big company. It's doing big business in China, and this guy is saying, look, this is good business for New Zealand.
Well, some may say. Of course it is, but there are hundreds of companies doing business in New Zealand, in China from New Zealand, and I mean we can't have a minister picking out a particular one and going to it because of her husband's involvement. That's the issue here.
I was going to say,
don't forget that it's the perception. She doesn't actually have had to do anything wrong. The cabinet manual is very clear. It's the perception, and the perception here is a stinky one.
And remember, in those meetings,
well, what was it?
But in those meetings. But in those meetings, she did not need to engage on will you do this and will you do that for this company. The sheer fact of the matter that her presence was there, an official was there, in the Chinese business government culture is enough to know that there is going to be an association that's going to be beneficial for that. And really, why should that business be put ahead of the rank, be the cab that's at the front of the rank, if you like.
So is that clear?
In front of other businesses in New Zealand. Now, if you were another business that was having to do it through, hard graft and really marketing your product, you'd be pretty hacked off with what Judith Collins and others had done there. She may be, who knows, maybe she's totally naive in these things. She's a justice minister. She's not a trade minister. But if that naivety is there, well, then that spells big question marks about her leadership aspirations as well.
Roddy, do you think there's an element of, colleagues are quite quiet on this, do you think there's an element of, how do you say it, competition, post-John Key competition in this as well? In terms of jockeying for position here with the National.
I think there is, and but more particularly there'll be an anger about the immediate result, and the immediate result was to take the heat off David Cunliffe. And how angry would you be about that? Here was David Cunliffe in all sorts of trouble.
Yes.
And suddenly here's a cabinet minister in trouble. Suddenly the leader of the opposition being in trouble isn't so exciting. And so that's what would have made them angry. The other thing is, the National Point's key selling point is John Key's trustworthiness and his credibility. She put that on the line for her personal benefit in the sense of staying on as a minister. Plus, of course, they've been trying to lay the groundwork heading into the election that David Cunliffe is tricky. Well, here's a cabinet minister saying, I just popped in for a cup of tea.
On the way to the airport.
Comes out, it's a bit more than that. The old tricky thing goes both ways now.
So it's a bit of a muck-up.
I think, too, that, what we saw in the wake of this, too, that we have all seen Judith Collins' rise, and we could see that she'd created a caricature, if you like, of the strong woman who was going to break the bones of anybody.
Now, you mentioned, you say this goes right back to the Hollow Men.
Yeah, well, there's an email from Bill English that is sent to Don Brash, and it's reproduced in the Hollow Men book. And in there, Bill English is kind of cautioning Don Brash about Judith Collins as a young MP, or reasonably recent MP, and he's kind of putting in there that she has created a media persona, but the problem is that she believes it, and I think this week we saw the peeling back of that kind of outer kind of thing that we see. And like we know, a lot of us and politicians and that, you create an identity that might not reflect the soft inside you have. But for Collins, and we saw it when the media went around her by midweek, and her voice started to crack, and she pretty much had to get out of that situation as she was going to break down. Now, if someone has been striding along saying, I'm Crusher Collins, and having all these strong boys all around her, suddenly she's exposed. Where are the strong boys? They're not around her, and she cracks under pressure like this. Well, she's not prime ministerial kind of
interesting
stuff there, I don't think. But yeah, there was warning signs from Bill English way back, when the Hollow Men came out all those years ago.
Gosh, finally, if John Key doesn't get the maths in this election, and he's not going to stick around, who's going to stump up to be the new leader of the National Party?
Well, the two front runners are, Stephen Joyce and Simon Bridges, by the look of it.
20 minutes past 8 o'clock, we're back with Rodney Hide and Selwyn Manning. We're going to be talking about the Greens policies, telling kids to cycle to school, and a whole lot more. Stay with us. We're back soon.
It's Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman.
24 minutes past 8 o'clock. I've got to mention too the soundtrack to your life in the next hours with Labour MP Shane Jones, spending an hour with him and his music. And I see, Rodney, you've got a piece in the Herald this morning. Bold number 3 grabs the spotlight, quoting the contrasting performance is stark, and it's clear that Jones is emboldened. He hasn't given up his leadership ambitions. He is clearly positioning for leader should Labour fall short this election. And this is about the man of the moment, Selwyn. It's about Shane Jones waking up and. What's this about? Where does this come from?
Well, we were talking earlier about creating a reputation that politicians have to do, and certainly Jones is doing this. For some outside of politics, I think there would be a thing where they're scratching their head and thinking, okay, is this the Shane Jones that we've heard people say where he's pretty good, he's a good politician, he's certainly a strong orator and things. Well, where's he been for all of these years, and people will be starting to wake up to that. I think if he was pitching, there's a dangerous game. If he's pitching to be a potential leader should Labour fall short at this year's election, well, then there will be others there that are inside that party, particularly in the membership and the union bloc, that are saying he pulled the thing down. So, these kind of criticisms of potential coalition partners do not give a confidence to the voting public.
Rodney, you're talking about him in context of his scrap with the Greens, calling Gareth Hughes a mollyhawk. Gordon Campbell said something very, very interesting in his piece. He said, let's make it really simple for Shane Jones, really, really simple. What he's doing is he's destroying any chance of a coalition.
No, he's not. I mean, it depends on your strategy that Labour have. So Labour have got a strategy of saying, okay, we're not going to make it on our own. We've got the big two third parties, the Greens and Winston, and they're saying, yeah, we could go with them. And then the issue is this: do you cuddle the Greens or do you smack them? And what David Cunliffe is doing is cuddling the Greens, and what Shane Jones is doing is smacking them. Now, this isn't a good cop, bad cop routine. This is actually a clear division in terms of strategy. And to me, the right strategy is to be smacking them. The reason is quite simple. The Greens are nutty and extreme and are scaring off Labour centre voters. No doubt about it. It may well be that if the Greens are strong, Labour can't win because they scare too many centre voters. Now, if you attack them, you can drive their vote down by putting them out. You can show that in government they're going to be bit players in government, not big players like, David Cunliffe is making them out to be. But also the Greens don't have any option but to go with Labour. And so you can't actually destroy your chances of being in government by actually knocking them around. Now, he's not knocking them around, to me, in a nasty way. He's just pointing out that I don't agree with these policies.
I don't know. I mean, what you're doing, you're sending a clear message. I can see you're sending a clear message to the voters of New Zealand saying this is not a viable bloc.
One of the things here, like where Rodney is going with that is, there is a school of thought that says that the battle should remain in the centre, and that's why Colin Craig and John Key try to actually find common ground, even when Colin Craig is falling short of, in many circles, a credibility factor. But with Labour, I think there is a sizable proportion of the voter out there that if you saw policies where you had, like the power thing, some people might not, Rodney wouldn't agree with the power solution that they came up with last year, but what you saw was Winston, you saw the Labour people, David Parker and David Cunliffe, and you saw Russell Norman all in one table saying, this is our solution. Now, if that was happening now, there would be a sense of something that the people could vote for. It may be for that party, it might be for that one, but they would know it would be a vote that's contributing to a change. And that, I think, is a more sound, stable kind of approach to election campaign. I just can't see it.
I see non-unification. I can't see what the
that's because
the device is.
Looking at the Jones factor. So my view is that Jones should be working as a team. If he wants to be leader in this MMP environment, he has to be able to play the team vote. He clearly favours the New Zealand First Labour thing. Do the voters match that? It seems like
do they have the maths? Is that enough?
No, it's not. I mean, it's been tried before and it failed, and there were many reasons for that. I think the way
you don't think though, Sal, when you're blinded a little bit by the fact that you like a left-wing bloc to be in government.
No, I think we're testing the ideas out. There
is a definite, reasonable strategy to be taking by Labour to say simply this: we've got the Greens if we need them. What we need to do is to win more voters. Clearly, the strategy of the left is that somehow 800,000 people are all lefties that didn't vote for them. And
that might be set. But Rodney, the strange thing is that the Green Party is having internal debates on where it really sits. Yeah. And there is a big push inside with Julianne Genter and others like that say, I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm green. And out of those three parties, New Zealand First, Labour and the Greens, which one is the one that worked with the National Party last time? It was the Greens.
Yeah, I've got to come back to a couple of these points. It's fascinating stuff. Text us, text live to 3920 your viewpoints. You can email me too, radiolive.co.nz. Go to the Sunday show page and the email is there. It's time for news update.
This is Auckland's Radio Live, 100.6 FM.
It's Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman.
35 minutes past 8 o'clock. Welcome to the show. We're with Rodney Hide and Selwyn Manning. Just a little bit on the, just picking up on a couple of those things. The Green Party right now. Selwyn Manning, they seem to be, or not in a honeymoon period. They seem to be a bit of soul searching going on. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
there's quite a lot in the Auckland area. The membership base, even delegates that are kind of questioning really where the Greens are located. Like Rodney expressed just before, a clear view that it was in the left, and most of us would look at the Green Party and we think, oh yeah, it's in that left part. There are internal debates and saying, well, where exactly is it? The candidates that it's pulling through, perhaps if it's going to get rid of 2 or 3 that are in the caucus at the moment, would suggest those that are right up the top, that they're actually moving to more pragmatic responses.
So there's 2 blocks. There's a fission, perhaps. Yeah, well, things like, a farmer, for example, is one of them. Another one is experienced in business leadership down in Wellington. These are the high flyers in the party, and they're ones who do subscribe to that mantra of I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm green. So you can see for the Green Party, it may be trying to actually reconnect with shifts that have been out there in New Zealand society. New voters, do they see things in the left-right kind of way? Maybe they don't. So all of these things are going on inside, and relating to strategy, you start peeling it back and you can tell there's strains there. Rodney, you paint them as loony greens.
Yes.
That's pretty heavy. Why say that? What's particularly loony about them? And this is the modern narrative of the 21st century. It's green. It's the green economy. It's green business. What's loony about it?
They're fundamental, and I mean, it's interesting. I think there will be a debate going on within the Greens, as Selwyn saying. I'm not disagreeing with that, but fundamentally, Russell Norman, is a hardcore socialist, has been his whole life, given his background in other political parties. Second of all, they're fundamentally opposed to economic growth, industrialisation and resource exploitation. So everywhere you look, they're shutting down the opportunities to develop our resources, to have jobs, and to produce a standard of living that we so earnestly desire.
Well, they would completely disagree with that. They would say they would. They'll say they're creating a new type of job that is.
They've never created a job in their life, the Greens. I mean, look at them. And, the idea that they're creating more jobs for bureaucrats, they're creating more fake jobs, by subsidising this and subsidising that in their proposals. But, that's the difficulty with the Green mantra. Plus, it's not based on anything real. It's based on an emotion. Yes, of course we care about the environment. Yes, of course we've got to look after the environment. But does that mean that we can't have any development, that we can't have any industry, that we can't have, practices that, develop our resources and use them? You get the sense from the Greens, never. And don't forget this, what prompted Shane Jones to have a crack at Gareth Hughes was the fact that Gareth Hughes wasn't even satisfied with an independent commissioner looking at a project. He wanted the government to stop it before it even looked at it. And I mean, that's what annoys me about them, and this is why I say they're nutty. They're not even prepared to allow us to look to see what minerals or resources we have. We're not even allowed to know.
No. They're not. They've said, I've asked Russell Norman explicitly, they're not against mining per se. It's got to be done a certain way.
Everyone that comes along, and don't forget they're against exploration licenses, which is actually having a bloke to have a look. That's not a license to mine, that's a license to have a look.
I think, what this does too is it shows that politics does need a counterbalance. It does need a party like the Greens that is going to actually speak the views and the ethos, if you like, or the wants of people that are voting for it. And there are 10 to 12% of people out there that look like they're
that is a huge lump of people. I'm just thinking.
Of course.
I mean, just thinking the Values Party in the
exactly,
70s.
but
they're tiny. I mean, they've grown and grown and grown. So why can they not be a part of a state government?
I think the Greens need to really speak to those people and tell them exactly what is going on inside their party relating to their internal debates, or what they really stand for and where they're really going. And this presumption that it sits in the left there, I think, is the leftover of when the alliance collapsed. But this Green Party is quite different to that. So if those voters want to have a good look at that, it may be that the left-right thing has no relevance to their choices. It may be purely environmentalism. But the Greens need to be front-footing there.
Interesting stuff.
The interesting problem for Labour is that this is precisely that 10 or 12%, because that's like a quarter of the power of a subsequent government.
Yeah.
And what Labour know is that makes it very hard for them heading into an election, and they also know it makes it very hard for them in government, because I would suspect if the Greens are real and they're going to implement a fraction of their policies, business confidence will take a hit.
Right.
That means a loss of jobs, a loss of growth, and people will feel it. And that's what Shane Jones, I think, being on the right of the Labour Party, is pointing out. He says if we go with Winston Peters, we can actually have economic policy that's more centrist in the manner of Helen Clark. Don't forget,
but the numbers don't stack up, though. The numbers don't stack up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, keep going.
Ruled the Greens out because she realised they were nutty.
But there was different proportions of support for the two parties. So Winston Peters was a player. The New Zealand First Bloc was a player. But the numbers aren't there now.
Really?
Well, they're not there. The numbers aren't
Rodney, is one thing I was going to say is what Shane Jones was talking about, was it a disguised or a rather hidden attempt for support for Winston Peters? Was that what it was about?
Shane Jones,
because they're close,
Yes, they're very close. Shane Jones is a very clever guy, and there's no doubt. Look at what he's been doing. He's been jumping up and down about the countdown supermarkets. He's been jumping up and down against foreign students. He's jumping up and down about national economic development. This is very much the politics of Winston Peters. I think they have a lot of grounds for agreement. And Shane Jones looks at the Greens and says these guys are nutty. So too does Winston. So I think it's a friendship, but also it's a policy alignment between the centre, the centre right of the Labour Party, who say actually our policy is more aligned and we could work better with Winston, than we could with the Greens.
What's interesting too is New Zealand First, Winston Peters has kind of shown that there's some bottom lines that he's calling now. The buyback of the state assets that have been peeled off to the share market, for example, they're bottom lines. Now that impacts on the relationship between New Zealand First and National. If National's short and it needs the kingmaker or whatever, then Winston Peters is saying, well, you better start to actually put your coins in a purse here because you've got to peel these back into the state. Now, those kind of things indicate that there's more common ground. Now, I'm talking about positioning in the thing, and it shows more common ground with where the Labour Party and the Greens are. If the numbers are going to go that way, and Peters may sit there in the crossbenches and say, I don't want to be in a coalition with anybody here. I'm going to actually influence the shape of legislation as it goes through the House. You want my support, you want to stay in government to both of these leading parties, then you're going to have to shape your legislation to fit my wants. So that may be where he is positioning to go.
I think everyone's learnt too to take Winston's bottom lines with a pinch of salt.
1996 was an illustration of surprise.
Sure,
yes.
and then remember he was going to buy back the Chinese, buy back all the forests from the Chinese, and of course never another word, So, Winston says a lot of things before the election, but he can quickly change his position after an election. He's done it every time.
It is 8:43 here. I'm with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hide, jumping into some of the policies. And here we go, Rodney. The Greens tell the kids to cycle to school. Speaking of nutty, perhaps, they want to build up to $200 million in cycle lanes and walkways around schools if they are in government, and funding would be redirected from low-value projects such as the Holiday Highway north of Auckland, quote unquote. Okay, so this is on the back of the fact that NZTA data show that a third of cars in rush hour were driven by their parents taking their kids to school. Aside from that, that's job creating, Rodney. 200 million cycle lanes.
It doesn't create jobs, funnily enough. Government spending money doesn't create jobs, but put that to one side. Look, I think this would be a great idea to have kids able to cycle to school on a cycleway, safe from the traffic. It would be fantastic. But here's my question. Where's the map of the cycleways that will be built over 4 years for $200 million, and how many kids will be able to ride on them to school?
That's a good point.
Where's that map?
That is a good point.
I mean,
well, they haven't done it yet.
Of course they haven't.
It'll be a big map.
They've pulled the number out of the air, because I sit there and I think, oh yeah, look, I'd love it if my kids could hop on a bike and ride to school on a cycleway. And then I look at the logistics of that, and I say, actually, we're all thinking that it's a bit like, a train. They promise you a train, and you think it'll be great to be able to walk down to the train station. You say, where's the map? And that's where the Greens have come up with the emotion of kids riding safely to school. I'd just like to see the map and work out how many kids are going to be able to ride to school.
There's some interesting stuff that can come off that if you peel away where the Greens have gone. There is, like out in South Auckland, the Alfriston College, in Manurewa East area, the kids that leave school there or go to school that are walking have to walk along areas where it's high, fast traffic, 80 kilometres. There's no footpaths, there's deep ditches, and they're kind of just in the gravel on the side of the road as they walk back home to Takanini. Now, that illustrates an issue relating to safety. If you had your kids going there, you'd be thinking, I want to go and drop them off. The other
pick up that point, because I know that area.
Yep.
If you were looking at that and you drew a circle around the catchment of the children that school is dragging in, right?
The zone.
The zone, and then you said, okay, around this catchment, we need cycleways and walkways to get to the school.
Yep.
I guarantee there's 20 million.
Yeah, well, that's right. It'll cost a lot. In Manurewa, Ratavine, it took years, almost a decade, for kids to be able, in that Ratavine community, who had to cross the Great South Road with no stop signs or anything, to get to their primary school. It took years to get an underpass so that they could get there. That costs money.
So, Rodney, you were saying, 20 million? So 200 million won't go so far if you're talking about one precinct.
I'm just interested, that's the whole point. It's easy for a politician to get up and say, I want, and I love it, like I said, I'd love kids to be able to cycle and walk to school, but actually, to be realistic, before we can make a decision, before we can commit to this, we just need to see the map of all the cycleways that $200 million will build.
First up, I mean, this is an example really of what one might call longitudinal political thinking. I'm just quoting here. They revealed in a policy paper published this morning that it hoped to reverse this trend by investing $50 million a year over 4 years into the cycleways. If it was successful, the policy would reduce congestion, carbon emissions, and these child obesity rates. So you're talking about political thinking, which is not election cyclic. It's actually it's long-term future New Zealand stuff.
One of exactly. One of the things there that is the right. It's absolutely right for opposition parties now is vision, and so vision stuff. It's difficult for John Key to come out with the vision of New Zealand or reinvent the vision because we're living his vision now. He's been in for 2 terms. They were leading a vision for a long time prior to getting into government. If people look around and they think, yep, I like what it looks like out there now, this is Planet Key. Well, their vision is already here. So all the opposition parties have the benefit, if you like, of saying this isn't good enough on these points, and our vision is this. Really hard for John Key to actually reinvent himself at this stage in the game.
But here's the thing, and just going a bit tangentially, but back to the point. When Judith Collins misbehaved, John Key was able to shut her down. Now, she's one tough woman. Shut up, shut her down. Here's Shane Jones getting ticked off by David Cunliffe for attacking Gareth Hughes. The very next day, he goes out and he attacks Russell Norman for being an Australian. Now, that is a MP openly defiant of his leader, and Cunliffe is powerless to do anything about it. That's the real issue that the left confront. They actually don't have a leader that's in charge or in control of strategy, of policy, indeed of their own MPs. And that's why Shane Jones is able to pop off like this, and this is why it's going to be very, very tough for them to get elected.
That'll change with Matt McCartan.
Well, Matt McCartan was there when this happened. It didn't change a thing.
What we're seeing too is somebody that has been given a lot of airplay because he had a lot of good ideas and did his job as an opposition MP over Countdown. Those debates needed to be there. All that information over Countdown needed to be pulled in. So there's a big focus on Shane Jones, and disproportionate to where it was perhaps 3 months ago. 3 months ago it wouldn't have mattered. Now it does. But the fact of the matter is that these parties are starting to show a vision of where they go. Irrespective of who the leader is or whatever, these parties are starting to represent. If you look at Cunliffe's Cunliffe's economic speech this week showed where he believes New Zealand should go, and that's basically people who look at the ports and see all those logs sitting there and getting shipped off overseas.
We'll talk about that after the break.
Got to change.
We'll just talk about that, but finally, just back to this point here. Rodney, did you cycle or walk to school, or were you dropped off by your mum when you went to school?
No, we all cycled, and everyone did, and we cycled down the main street, and when I was little, my sisters would dub me on the back and you'd wobble down the street. But here was the thing, everyone drove a bit slower. The traffic wasn't as congested. And, I lived in a town of 5,000 people, and, we biked every day down to primary school. We biked every day down the main street, wobbling down. And people were looking out for kids, weren't they?
Yes, they were. That's a good point. Well, Selwyn, what about you?
We lived opposite the school, so it wasn't a big task. It was across the road and you're at school.
It does intrigue me as a societal change. It really has shifted, hasn't it, Rodney, that the whole idea of dropping kids off to school. I mean, I never was dropped off to school, even in the rain, by Dad.
Oh, I can remember my mum. My dear mum's listening, and she's such a lovely, lovely woman. So, thanks, Mum. But I got to make an admission to my mother. She would often, when it was raining, drive me to school.
Yeah.
And I'd stand out in the rain to get wet, and then walk into school with all the other kids wet, because I didn't want to look a sook. Because the kids that got dropped off by their mums were pansies, so I'd have to my mother would make all this effort to get me to school dry, and then I'd go and get wet.
I've got to say, the time that Dad did drive, he'd tease me. I'd say, "Drop me off here, Dad, a block away from school." He goes, "No, up to the gates," and I go, "Dad, stop the car now!" And he'd go one further and drive me into the school.
How embarrassing!
Wallace, that must have damaged you.
Laughing all the way, and I'd be angry for the whole day. It's 8 minutes away from 9 o'clock. We're with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hide. Back soon.
It's Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman.
5 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Fascinating hour here with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hide. You can listen to this too later on. In fact, about an hour. I've put it up quite quickly on online on RadioLive.co.nz. Just launching into a little bit of David Cunliffe's speech here, quoting right now, foreign direct investment is poorly managed. And it's Kiwis who are losing out. Overseas investors are buying up land, farms and good companies, then sending the profits and jobs offshore. Labour will revamp FDI to attract quality investors with a credible business case designed around creating jobs and providing new technology to New Zealand companies. Rodney Hide, that sounds pretty good to me.
It sounds pretty good, yes. And I mean, full marks to David Cunliffe, because in the speech he clearly identified that economic growth is important. He clearly identified that investment is what makes economic growth possible. So, you know, I think that's fabulous, because, you know, that is the essence of getting everyone, you know, super fund and universal KiwiSaver. On that FDI, the idea that he'll pick and choose, I mean, listen, we need investment. And part of the deal with investment is the opportunity for people to make a return. Now, they can make a choice. They can put that return back into New Zealand, which would be a good thing, or they can take the return back out of New Zealand and say, you know, we're getting money to invest elsewhere in the world. Now, the only way we can get the investment is actually to make the return profitable in New Zealand, and that's what we need to be doing. If it's profitable to invest in New Zealand, they'll be putting that return back into New Zealand, and we'll be having a stronger economy. It's very difficult for politicians to sit there and say, oh, you can buy that farm, but you can't buy that business, or you can buy that business, you can't buy that.
I was thinking that
farm.
Actually. That's right.
It just becomes impossible. What you need to do is create a good environment for the investment. And by the way, David Cunliffe, you know, in focusing on growth and focusing on investment, that, you know, I'm not knocking the guy.
Yeah, exactly. I think what this does do, it puts out a vision. It shows a particular methodology on how to achieve economic growth. People can choose whether or not they subscribe to that or not. One of the factors in here that really I find quite interesting is this emphasis on the regions and the provinces. Now, it's been a long time since we heard about stimulating economic growth there. There is a method to what he's talking about in that speech. But the listeners, if they haven't seen it, it's worth having a read through. It's online all over the place. But it comes back down to those simple things, I think. If you're driving along the Marine Parade and you head down past Port Hill and Napier, you go past the ports, or Bluff Hill and Napier, you go past the ports, you see a mountain of logs that are getting shipped off overseas. Now, it would be really cool, I think, to see some sort of investment going into manufacturing bases where instead of logs being sent offshore so that other countries can make them into something and make the profit, that they're made into something here as well. Sure, raw commodity has a place in our export markets. Don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Right. But the value-added aspects to this is really fascinating, progressive.
We've got to move on. We could talk for another half an hour, but I have a date with Shane Jones, his life and his music for the next hour.
Well, give him our best, and you can tell him that Selwyn and I disagree about his approach.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
I will do. Well, I've seen his songs, and I can tell you. Look, what has he got? He's got We Are the Champions by Queen.
There you go, you see.
Yeah, well, I don't go for that one. So.
All right, Rodney, thanks
for nailing his colours. Even in his choice of music, he's attacking David Cunliffe.
It's not good. I thought Shane Jones was not in the rainbow faction of the Labour Party.
All right, guys, good talking to you. See you next time. And indeed, Shane Jones after the news.